Hi everyone. In this video course, I'm going to show you how to do architectural plans and architectural details in Rhino 8 and Adobe Illustrator. So I'm going to show you how to do line weights, dimension styles, layouts in Rhino 8, but I'm also going to show you how to do all of these things in Adobe Illustrator as well, and maybe some layout options from Adobe InDesign. So let's just go ahead and get started. So the first thing that you want to make sure of is that when you're modeling in Rhino, any version of Rhino, you want to have a clean Rhino model. And what that means is you need to have clean and organized layering like you see here, and you just need to model things properly. I think this saves you a lot of time when you want to create or generate plans or even details. And so if you see here, I have a very distinct hierarchy of my assembly. So this is actually like a rain screen assembly that you see here. And I actually made a video about this in a couple videos ago. But in general, there isn't that many overlapping geometries. Things are mostly solid. There isn't any open curves or open solids. And I would say that the more solid your geometry is, the cleaner your Make 2D is going to be. Right? So that's just one thing to really understand when you're going to generate plans or details from Rhino. So right here, I have a clipping plane activated right here. So if I click on this and I go to my properties up here, I want to make sure that my clipping plane is active both in my top view and my current perspective view. And once I do that, I want to go to my top view, and I'm just going to go ahead and select this whole thing in Make 2D. Just keep in mind this is just a partial model of a floor plan I already have, but I just have this partial just to save time. You'll see the full floor plan of Make 2D. But right here is going to be the Make 2D that I'm going to do. So if I go to top, right, it's over here. So I'll just select this whole thing right here, and I'll do Make 2D. And the settings here, I definitely want to have my clipping plane intersections. That's very important, okay? And then viewport rectangle is just good to maintain the proportion of what you have. It's not really necessary. Group output is optional. It'll group a lot of things on the same layer or on the same plane of the same cut. That's also optional, but it's really important that you have clipping plane intersections activated and that you have tangent edges if you have any type of curved geometry. Up here on projection, definitely the current view, which is going to be top. And then object properties, very important. You want to do maintain source layers. This is very, very important because this is going to help you both in Rhino and in Adobe Illustrator once it makes curves. So you just click OK, and then it's going to generate the Make 2D for you in all curves. It'll typically land in the 0, 0 point. Anytime you make 2D, it'll typically land in the 0, 0 point of your Rhino model. Let me just zoom out and go to the 0, 0 right here. So it's going to automatically select it for you after you make 2D. Let me just unlock this ground plane and just remove it. So if I just do unlock, let me just delete that for now. So you see everything is in its correct layers. And if you see, again, if you have a clean model, things are going to be pretty organized. And things are going to have a good hierarchy as well. So you don't have to remodel things or redraw things as much if you have a very clean model. So this is just something really important to understand. And so the next segment of the video, I'm going to show you how to create line weights, how to create dimension styles, and how to lay it out in Rhino. So I'm just going to transition over to the next segment now. And I just want to reiterate, what you see here is just an example piece. I actually have a more detailed 3D model, but this is just a little bit lighter on the screen capture. So when you see the next segment, it's going to be a more detailed Make 2D that I already created. So let's just transition over. So this is the next segment where I'm going to show you how to do dimension styles and line weights. And also I'm going to show you where I get my blocks and where I get my hatches from. And this is very helpful if you want to kind of stick in Rhino, but I'm also going to show you the reason why I also use Adobe Illustrator as well. So in here, as you can tell, there's way more elements in here, again, because this is from another 3D model that I made 2D. And just right off the bat, what's really important to understand is page size. You should know how big of a scale that you want to present your drawings at. So for example, I'm showing this at a 1/2 inch scale on a 24 by 36, right? And a good way to determine this to get a good feel of how big you want this on a sheet, let's say that your presentation is 24 by 36. I can draw like a rectangle. I'll do center. I'll click here. I'll do 2 feet by 3 feet, right? And then the scale factor of a 1/2 inch scale is 24. That's the scale factor. If I go here and I type in scale, I can scale this up here by a factor of 24. So right here, this is showing me a 1/2 inch scale factor of a 24 by 36. So this is going to give me a good, value, or I guess a good example of how big my drawing is going to look at a 1/2 inch scale on a 24 by 36. You know, if it's a quarter scale, scale factor is 48. Eighth scale, scale factor is 96. You're just going to multiply the denominator by 12. You know, that's basically what you're doing. And so once you do that, this is going to give you a clear determination of how big you want your drawing to be and also how strong you want your line weights to be. All right. So that's just the number one thing that you should really determine right off the bat. How big do I want my drawing on a sheet and what's my sheet size? Okay. So once you have that determined, I would go ahead and make a new layout. So I already have one created over here, but I'm going to show you how to create a new layout. Okay. So if I click on the plus sign, I can do new layout and you pick your page size. So again, mine, I'm going to do 24 by 36. And I think in metric, it's either B1 or B2. That's the closest. I can be mistaken. It's one of the B sizes though. And then you do landscape and I just do okay. All right. Now, if I want to capture that drawing, I'll just click on this top left corner here and I'll do add detail. This is kind of like a viewport, right? So if I go here and I go from here to here, right? It's going to show me what's inside the model space. So if I double click inside of here, it takes me into the model, right? In the model space. If I double click out, it takes me out of the model space. Okay. So again, I already know what my scale is, right? It's this 1/2 inch scale. And you see this thing right here? This is like a great reference that I can use. I can use it as a reference for this new viewport now. So if I click here, for example, right? If I click right here, I can go to my properties and I can set the scale, right? So this is important. When I set the scale for this, I want to make sure I'm using the correct scale as my scale factor. So this is inches to feet. So if I do 1 inch equals 2 feet, that's the same as saying it's a 1/2 inch scale. If I do 2, you see, this is basically like a 1/2 inch scale. If it was a 1/4 inch scale on the Rhino viewport settings, it'll be 1 inch equals 4 feet. A scale, 1 inch equals 8 feet, like that. All right. So this is 2. So if I go in here, for example, if I take this viewport and I move it to this corner here, right there, right? Now, if I click on this viewport here, I want to move it to the corner. So I'm going to take this one and just move it over here to this corner, like that. All right. And then, so this is the viewport. I can just drag it out here. There you go. So now this is aligning with the viewport, okay? It's very important to understand. So now this border that I made originally, go back to the top, right? That's 24 by 36 aligns with the viewport. Okay. There's other methods of doing it, but I just like to do it this way. It's kind of old school. There's probably more efficient ways of doing it, but I like to do it this way. So now once you have that set, everything is to correct scale. Everything is to proper scale. So now you can start doing your line weights. I would not recommend doing your line weights until you have this to the actual scale you want to work at. Because if you make it too big or too small, the line weights might be too thick or too thin. All right. So once you have that set, we can start setting line weights on our layers. And this is all live, okay? So if I go here, right, and I do print preview, it's gonna start updating the line weights for you immediately, okay? So let's say, let me just like zoom in here for a second. You see how you can actually see the line weights of certain items, right? So if I go to my layers, and let's say, for example, my clip for like facade, for example, right? We can turn it off, see it's gone. All the layers still work the same. You're just in layout view. So here I have a 0.13. I just want to show you what happens when I make it really thick, how it updates it live. You see here, maybe like 0.7. You see how it gets really thick? So it'll update it live for you. So you can see it in real time, which is helpful. Okay? So, and you'll just start doing that for all of your clipping plane intersections, right? So not all of your clipping plane intersections are going to be the same, right? So like, for example, this is like a thin plywood finish, right? Like a 1/2 inch. So it's not going to be that thick. So you don't want that to be as thick as your facade, right? Or the same thing with the dimensional or rough lumber, right? It's not going to be the same thickness as this because then it'll start to look a little too thick or a little too thin. So you have to start playing around with your line weights to see how you can get that hierarchy established. But that's really important that you have strong hierarchy, okay? And again, I'm going to show you in Illustrator a different method, but for people who like to do things in Rhino, this is how I like to do it. And again, the print color, you see here, this is what's determining the color, not my layer color. It's this print color. So for example, if I go back to the facade example, which are these like wood slats, if I go here and change this to maybe like just orange, just to be very, you see how it becomes orange, right? So that's just something to understand about the color. And the same thing with the line type, right? So some of these are continuous, some of these are dashed. You see right here. And so you'll just start to assign things like that for all of your layers. And One thing to keep in mind though is that I would say this is still not a 100% accurate representation of how it's going to look when you export it as a PDF. I would say this is like 70% accurate. I think the grays are going to be a little bit lighter, or not, I think they are. They're going to be a little bit lighter. So just keep that in mind. When you do grays in Rhino between the actual model space or even layout space, and when you print it to PDF, it's actually going to be lighter. And I'm going to show you the final export, but I want to cover a couple of things here. So the other thing I want to cover with you here are the dimension strings, the line types, and how you can modify these things, and also the hatches, because you can import a lot of hatches. So I want to show you where I get my hatches from in the blocks. So if we start with the line types here, right? If you type in options, and if I go to line types, if you see here this little reset icon, it'll say add defaults. That's important because sometimes it won't be there. So you see these are all the default line types, okay? So make sure you have that for your line types, add defaults, okay? And then for dimensions, if I go to annotation styles, right? I want to do a new one, right? So, and then I want to base it off of for example, if it's a 1/2 inch scale, right? If I do, for example, new, it's going to base it off of a copy of something, right? Or you can do like feet inches. So I think foot inch architectural, just for sake of example, I'll do okay, right? And it's right here. The first thing you want to do is change the model space scale, okay? That's very important. So because this is in feet inches, if I go to units, I don't like to jump around, but if you see model space is in feet, but then layout is in inches, okay? If I go back to my template, I'm gonna make this 2. Even though this is the scale factor of like 1/8 scale, the 1/2 scale will be 24, I wanna make it 2. That's what I wanna do. If it's a 1/4 scale, make it 4. If it's 1/8 scale, make it 8. That's how you're gonna do it if you want things to be scaled correctly. If you make it 96, it's gonna be massive. That's because of how I have my units set up between model and layout. Okay? It's very important to understand that. But this is how you create your dimension styles, and you can decide whether you want dots. So like for arrows, for example, I did 1/2 inch scale. You see how my model space scales too? My arrows are dots, and I made it just a little bit smaller. I would actually follow the standard if you're going to use the regular ticks, like or the arrows, the 0.125, which is 1/8 scale, which is good because this is the actual size it'll be in real life. But I made it just a little bit smaller for dots. I like to use dots. And then also, for your precision in your units, you can change the round off, right? You want to round off by 1 inch or 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch. That's your choice. And if you want to suppress the zeros, that means like you don't want to show the zeros in your dimensions. But that's basically how you do a dimension style. And then you can just start dimensioning right away. And you can pick a default for your dimension style, but you need to add a dimension style. That's important, okay? Now, hatches. So if you see here, I have a lot of hatches here. And I'll show you where I get all these hatches from. And then I'll show you the blocks. So for my hatches, there's actually a couple of helpful websites. The one I like the most is actually a very interesting website. It's right here. It's this website. It's called cadhatches or cadhatch.com. It's very helpful and it's royalty free. And I use this a lot. You can get a lot of hatches from here. So if I go to home, you can find a lot of different types of hatches. I typically use a lot of the wood hatches that they have here. I find them really helpful. I like the wood hatches a lot that are over here. So I use the wood hatches, and then like for example, for the concrete hatches, if you go down here, you can do the gravel. You can pass that for concrete, but there's another type of hatch that you can use. Let me go here to free downloads. And if you go to the BS compliant patterns, right? The concrete hatch, right? Plaster, these are very helpful as well. And then you have like the insulation hatch. And so a lot of these are very, very helpful to do the hatches because you can import the hatches into Rhino. These are .pat files. So you can import these into Rhino. Again, it's called cadhatch.com. And once you click on it, it just downloads immediately as a zip file and it's just a .pat. So again, I use this for my hatches a lot, okay? And then for my CAD blocks, let me just show you here. I have a bunch of CAD blocks. So these work for CAD or for Rhino. You see I have just a whole bunch here. They're pretty helpful for like plan view, top view. I use these a lot as well. You can have a lot of fun with these that like liven up your floor plan. I get this from this website. Again, it's a pretty like old looking website. It's right here. And so if you, it's called cad-blocks.net. And if you go home, you know, it just has all types of hatches. I mean, they don't look that nice on the preview, but they look fantastic when you just print it out as a vector drawing. And so this one I use a lot, like, you know, vegetation blocks. Even vegetation has a whole bunch of different types: trees in elevation, trees in plan, vegetation in plan, bathroom blocks, furniture blocks, beds, toilets, sofas, everything is on here. This is what I use most of the time. And it's absolutely for free. So these are the ones that I use the most for vegetation and for blocks. So that's why if you look, let's go back to Rhino. If you see here, this is all from that website. Okay? So that's why there isn't anything on here that I didn't take that wasn't from that website. So like you see these 3 hatches here, I got that from that website. The wood hatch and things like that. Okay? So you see here, the floor plan looks, I would say, very nice. I think there's a lot of nice hierarchy. Like I'm exaggerating the membrane layer here. I'm exaggerating this layer because I want it to read even at this scale, just as a thick dashed line. And one thing to understand is that when you're doing plans, you need to know what scale you're working at so that you're not overdrawing, you're not over detailing, you're not wasting your time. So you, like, for example, I don't want to make things super detailed. Like I'm not going to go in, I'm not going to hatch these because at this scale, you're not really going to see the hatch or even appreciate the hatch. Okay? So that's one thing that's really important to understand as a student is like you have to focus your effort on what you're actually going to see. Don't overwork yourself if you're not going to see a lot of these things in a presentation, for example. So here, what I'm going to see is just a major hierarchy of the wall assembly, right, between vegetation. Okay. So that's one thing to understand. Like, don't overwork your drawings if you're not going to see half of the things that you're working on. Now, in Rhino, you can also hatch this if you want to. I personally like to do, if my plans start to get very complex or if I have a lot of vegetation, I like to do my hatches in Illustrator. And in terms of line weights, I'm kind of in between doing line weights in Illustrator and in Rhino. It's a matter of preference. I sometimes like doing an Illustrator, sometimes I like doing Rhino, depending on this. But here, you know, the line weights look really nice, but there is this like level of control and like immediacy that you get from Illustrator that's really nice. I feel like there's more control over line weights and hatches in Illustrator. Rhino, sometimes it can lag. Sometimes catching the boundaries of the hatch can lag. It can crash your file sometimes. And it just depends how complex your file is. If your file is not that complex, it's fine. But if your file is very complex, it might crash the file or it might be really slow. Whereas in Illustrator, doing a live paint hatch is quite quick compared to AutoCAD or Rhino. But that's just my personal experience. Other people might have completely different experience, you know? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the PDF preview of this, but I'm also going to show you now the next segment how I can do this exact same thing in Adobe Illustrator with hatches, because I actually like to hatch my floor plan and I like to hatch the surrounding vegetation. And so I have these 3 hatches with me here that I'm going to take with me to Illustrator and use them as swatches. And one thing that I forgot to mention, which I'm going to do right now, is I want to show you how to import your hatches into Rhino. So if I do options, right, there's going to be a hatch dialog here. If you see hatch, you can just click on import and you just find where you downloaded the hatch. It should be like a .pat file. So that's very important to understand, okay? So once, and you can, and now in Rhino 8, I think in the latest update, you can import multiple hatches. From before, you had to do it one by one. And there are scripts in Rhino previous versions where you can import multiple hatches, but I think in Rhino 8 you can import multiple hatches now without a script. But yeah, you just click on import and you can bring in a bunch of hatches. And so these are really, really helpful. I love using these hatches. And if you don't have any of them, you don't use them, I can show you a bunch of other ways in Illustrator. But let me just, so when I do, I'll do Control P for print, right? And I want to definitely do Rhino PDF in a high resolution. And I want to do vector output, print color, right? And then if I scroll down, I want to match pattern definition. This is really important, okay? When I match pattern definition, that means it's going to match the line weights and the color displays that I have on my layers panel, okay? Really important. And if I scroll down here, you don't want to do your background. You don't have to do anything checked here, to be honest. And so if I go back up just for your scale, I want to match this, right? And I want to do 1-to-1 because this is all ready to scale at 1-to-1. And then you just click print and it'll do PDF. And I'll show you the PDF example. And again, just keep in mind, it's going to look much lighter than what you see here. So if I'm just going to transition over and I'm going to show you the PDF example. So if you see here, this is the PDF. You see how much lighter it is? It's much, much lighter. And honestly, I think it's a little too light, to be honest. I think the assets, like the blocks, are a little too light, in my opinion. I should go back and make it a little bit darker. But I really like, you need to have hierarchy in your plans when it comes to what's cut and what's not cut. And I think for a studio setting, you want to kind of exaggerate that hierarchy. For a professional setting, you want to make your drawings as clear as possible for the builder / contractor. It needs to be so obvious for them. They shouldn't be squinting to look at your drawings, you know? So I would say in a professional standpoint, too light, unless you want them to emphasize something, you know? But in a studio setting, a design setting, competition setting, I love these types of plans. I think these plans work really well. They're aesthetically pleasing. And again, my own critique of this is I would make the blocks a little bit darker, maybe like 2 shades darker, you know? But you do want this very strong, exaggerated hierarchy where like it just pops in front of you, you know? So like my vegetation's pretty light, the blocks are pretty light. I want my cuts to really pop, okay? Like you can tell right away what's wall and what's not wall, what's cut, what's not cut. Immediately, you know that. You know what's surface and what's not surface. So I like to give this a hatch though, because I think the hatch also helps in the hierarchy. And again, like I said, I like doing the hatch in Illustrator. But I'm going to show you everything in Illustrator. I'm also going to show you how to do the line weights from scratch in Illustrator. So you can skip over that part if you just want to see me do the hatches and how I do the hatches, okay? Okay, so let's say that I want to take this to Adobe Illustrator, right? Again, I want to take my little sample hatches that I made over here, and I also made another dimension style that's for a detail. Like, so this is a 1/2 inch scale. I want to do like a 1 inch scale or maybe like a 1.5 inch scale detail of this window opening that I'm going to show you as well. So what I want to do is I want to do export, right? Select objects to export. And I want to keep this boundary here. I want to do export and I want to do, to Adobe Illustrator, right? And I'll just call it whatever, test, okay? And I'll do save. Now you're going to get these settings here, which are really important. Snapshot of current view or preserved model scale. This is your choice, okay? If you do snapshot of current view, you're fine. You can keep it where it is. If you want to do it to a scale, like 1 foot equals, whatever inches, 1/8 scale, right? If you want to do that, you need to make sure that your model, your drawing, is on the 0, 0 point. Because if it's not on the 0, 0 point, it's going to fly off the artboard, okay? So just really important to understand. That's why I like to do snapshot current view, and I have this rectangle and I scale it up to the actual sheet size. Export viewport boundary, that's optional. Hatch, export as solids, I would not do that. If you have hatches, don't do that. Have it exported as the actual hatch. So have this unchecked if you have like patterned hatches or your patterns are not going to show up. Order layers, very important. Yes, order layers is basically that it's going to put things in a certain hierarchy. That's how you, for example, if you have things that are like clipping plane intersections, it's going to order all of the clipping plane intersection layers and then all of the curve layers and then all the make 2D, things like that. So I like to have order layers. And then you just click OK, and then it's just going to export. So here we are in Illustrator. If you get this dialog when you open up your file about legacy text, just go ahead and update the legacy text. That's just going to make it legible in Illustrator as text for your dimensions, for example, if you do your dimensions. So that's important to understand. And the first thing that I want to do is I actually want to update my artboard. So I want to just change my artboard size, and I want to go here and just make it a width of 36 inches and a height of 24, right? And I can press escape or I can press V. So once you do that, the next thing I want to do is, so you see this is a 24 by 36 as well, but it's just scaled down. So I'm going to just, let me move these little guys to the side like that. And let me just move this also to the right as well, and you'll see why. Let me move that, there you go. Okay, cool. So I want to scale this to my artboard and I'm going to use the length of it. Okay, so if I go here, select it, I can do transform. And I want the width, and make sure it's linked. I want the width to be 36. There we go. So now you see how it matches the width of the artboard perfectly. This is the artboard, by the way. This is just the actual limits of the space. So if I go here, Very nice. So I don't need this page border. I'm going to turn it off now. I don't need it. Perfect. So now we're at the 1/2 inch scale, okay? Now, if you want to quickly do line weights in Illustrator, it's great to select everything at once and make everything the same line weight at first, okay? So what I want to do is I want to select everything, okay? And give everything just a line weight of 0.1. This is how I start off. Just give everything a very light line weight of 0.1. And I get there. So now everything is light. I'm going to turn off these assets. So I think it's on my 0 layer. It's on these 2 layers. All right, I want to turn those off. And I want to turn off my dimensions. So I have the dimension layer, dims. That's turned off. So you see, that's why it's important to have, layers. So now I'm working with this, okay? So that's number 1. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to take everything and I want to give it a gray color. You don't have to do that. You can keep everything in the color first and then do it, but I have everything in layers anyway, so I'm not worried. So I want to give everything just a gray color. I just want to go here, and for my stroke, I'll just click on the black for now, and I'm going to give it just a very light tone. So maybe I'll give everything a 75 value, okay? That's everything has a 75K value. See, everything is just nice and light, okay? That's number 1. So the next thing I want to do after that is I want to start clicking on or locating what all my cuts are. Like I know what my cuts are in my model, right? So if I go to my layers, you see how everything is organized and it says order layers. That's basically how it's ordered for make 2D visible clipping plane intersection, you see? So you know right away it's my cuts. But if I just click here, it's going to activate it for me anyway. So that, right? This is my cut. This is a cut. That's a cut. I'm just clicking all very different things. I'll just start like this for now. You see that? So you see how all of these are highlighted here? If I hold shift and click on it, it'll click on all of the objects within those layers. Like that, and like this, okay? And so I want to give it maybe like a line weight of, so this is 0.1. Maybe I'll give it like 0.5. See how that looks? Yeah, that's nice. That's a nice hierarchy, to be honest. 0.5 is nice. So I'll do 0.5. And then you see how it kind of rounds off the corners? It looks a little too cartoonish. I want it to be a little bit stronger than that. So if I want it to be just sharp corners like that, and then over here as well, I want this to go over the gap. So now things are a little bit more sharp. Let me go back to my layers. So you see this? So now things are much more heavy, right? Now, for example, my window frame, or just all my door frame layers, I think it's right here, door frame, I want that to be very light. Maybe even lighter, like 0.08 for now. Very good. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. So let's see, this is my membrane layer. That's really important. Membrane. I actually want this to be quite thick. I want it to be 1.5. Like that. That's, yeah, because I want it to read in the plan. I want this to read in the plan. There's a membrane layer. And again, you see how it's like rounded off? You see how it's rounded off? I don't like that. It looks too cartoonish. And so I'm going to go here and I'm going to just square them off like that. Okay. And then I have a sheathing layer as well, which is this right here. I go to layers. And if I go to sheathing, which is I think right here, again, I'll do that 0.5. Okay, so all of these cuts that I have, I actually want to make them darker than this. So they're all 75%. I don't like that. I want them to be much darker. So if I go here, I can do select by object type. Like if you go here, you can select by fill color, stroke color, appearance. I'm just going to do select by stroke weight. Okay, and I want it to be black instead of the 75. I want it to be, you can do like 90%, but not 75. I want it to be black like that. So it really pops, you see, compared to everything else. And then the same thing with this membrane, like that. Nice. I don't know why this. Oh, I'm being silly. You have to go here. There you go. Make it black. There you go. Like that. I think it can be a little bit thicker, but I'm okay with that for now. So let's go. So you see, this is how it's like basically that's it when it comes to the line weights. I think my glazing layer can be a little bit darker. I want that to be a little darker as well. So if I go to my glazing layer, let me go here. It's the glass. I can make that maybe 0.25. or maybe 0.3. Let's look at it. Yeah, that's nice. I like that. But again, I would want to make it black. So let me just select all of them. You're starting to get the idea here, right? Beautiful. So that's basically like the major line weights for things, you see? Like, you see how quick that was? It's pretty quick, and you have a lot of control. Like, you can see if you like it or not. You can zoom in out. Same thing in Rhino, but for some reason, it just seems more organic when I do an Illustrator. So again, I have my blocks turned off, right? So if I go to my assets, you see, there you go, and turn on my dimension. There you go. I can update the dashed lines for this as well, but if you, because it'll maintain your dashed lines. If I click on this right here and I go to my here, you see it maintains the dash for you. So like I can have this as nothing and have this maybe make it like a little bit less, maybe like a 8 point. Let's see how that looks. Maybe more than that, maybe 6. Let's see. Maybe. There, that's nice too. So I'm basically done with the line weights portion of this on Illustrator. I like how the dimensions look. I like the hierarchy of the line weights of the cut versus the surface. I think that's nice. So next thing I want to do is do hatches. So I'm going to save the file, then we're going to start and work on hatches and how to create hatches. So I'm going to transition over and show you how to do hatches. And then that's basically it. So in this segment, I'm going to show you how to do hatches in Illustrator. Illustrator calls them swatches, and so Illustrator also has its own basic default swatches. If you go to the swatches panel, which is over here, and if you can't find it, you can just go to window and find swatches. But if you go to swatches and you go to the library for your swatches down here, you can go to basic. That's the one I basically do. I do patterns, basic graphics, and I do these 3: basic dots, lines, textures. These are the swatches or hatches that I use from Illustrator. The other method that I typically like to use, like, for wood grain or concrete, is like I did from Rhino. I brought it in from Rhino into Illustrator, right? So this is the one that you saw from before, right? So we have these 3. Let me just get rid of these borders real fast. And we can actually just make these swatches if we wanted to, right? So if I go here, right, let me just select it and just group it. Select this and group this. Select this and group this, okay? Once it's grouped, I can literally drag it into the swatches and it becomes a swatch, right? Take this, becomes a swatch. Take that, becomes a swatch, okay? So it's hard to tell, but now you have these 3 new swatches here. If I make, like, for example, a rectangle, right? You see how it has a concrete fill right now? And I can scale it up as well, right? Like if I scale it up, you see, it scales it up. And then here I can match this. If I do I to match properties, it'll match it as well, you see? Or let's say, for example, I want to change the grain. So like, I want to do like the wood grain, right? I can just click on this swatch here. It's the wood grain now, you see? Or I want to do the other grain like this. You see? You can also modify because maybe the swatch isn't like perfectly seamless. Let me see this one here. I mean, let me make it smaller actually, see what happens. It's a good test to see when something. There you go. So for example, this one isn't perfectly seamless, but this is easy to modify if you wanted to. So for example, if I go, that's this swatch, if I double click on here, you can actually modify the swatches here to make it seamless, right? I can either so I can do size tile to art, right? That's one way. And then I can also change the grid type to see which grid type gives me a more seamless look. So for example, if I do brick, you see the brick is almost seamless, it does a pretty good job of making it seamless. What I can do then is I can, like, for example, take this and just like move it to there, right? And take this. Like that doesn't have to be perfectly accurate, just close. Like that. That's if you want to make this like perfectly seamless. But again, if your things are so small you're not going to see the seams, I wouldn't even worry about it. But again, this is just one method. I'll show you another method as well. I think yeah, this is good. And then you can just click done. Or you can save a copy. We'll just do done. There you go. So now you see this looks way more seamless now, right? Now the other method is you can like drag in like a swatch, right? You can drag in a swatch, for example, in your folders here, right? And like for example, this is like the concrete hatch swatch, right? I can drag that in and use that as a swatch, right? So if I drag this in here, like this, drag that in, right? And then this can literally, if I drag this in here, it'll become a swatch as well. You just have to embed it. I'm sorry. So once you bring it in here, you have to embed it. So you have to pick your scale wisely. So like, like this, and then you want to embed it, and then you can drag it in. So that's another example. If you have like a JPEG example, you see, that's another way you can do it. Same thing with wood grain. I'll show you a wood grain example. Like for example, this wood grain. Drag it in there. Right, it looks pretty gnarly, but it's not. Don't worry about it. I mean, this is a very big file though. Like, see, it's so much too high of a PPI, but I can embed it, right, and then drag it in, and so that becomes a swatch now. You see? So a lot of ways of doing hatches. So I know this may be a little too long than what I wanted, but I just want you to understand that you can do a lot of custom hatches in Illustrator if you wanted to. So now let's just show you how I would hatch this plan. So the first thing that I would do is number one, save your file. Another thing that I like to do actually is let me just turn everything off except my very complex geometry, like these assets here, right? If I select these, right? And if I go to Pathfinder, which I have right here, but if you don't have Pathfinder, you can just go to Window, Pathfinder. If I go down here, I can do Pathfinder options, and I want to just remove redundant points. Okay, that's going to help a lot when you do like live paints. So it's not going to go over so many million points that you don't even need. So I do that right off the bat. Now, let me just go back and turn the layers back on. Now, the next thing that I do is I'm actually going to make a copy of this. All right, it's really important. So let me turn off my dimension because I don't want to have my dimensions on here. So I'm going to just take this and, well, let's first do the internal hatches, okay? So I'm actually going to turn, actually, let me just take everything. I'm going to do a copy right here. Okay. And so I want to make sure my boundaries are closed. Let me see. Very nice. So I'm going to go in here and select things like this. Just select this like that. Okay. And then I'm going to do a new layer. I'm just going to call it Live Paint. And I'm going to press K for Live Paint. And I'm going to click here. And it's going to give you a dollar. All right, cool. So you see here now things are in a boundary right now. You see? Things are in the exact boundary that I like them to be. This would have taken a very long time, I'm not gonna lie, in Rhino to get this boundary. Maybe some people's computers are better, but you see how nice it is? It goes around everything perfect. You can also do Shape Builder if you wanted to. Shape Builder works fine. I think it's Shape Finder or Shape Builder, forget, but that works fine as well. Okay. But so let me just press V to get out of here. Okay, so like for example, if I go to my hatch, right, the concrete hatch, right, I can just press K. There's my concrete hatch, right? Concrete hatch like that. You see? And I can change the scale of this if I wanted to. So for example, let me just make sure I don't have any stroke here. So for example, if I go here, make just a random, you see that? That's the current scale, okay? If I make this bigger, this is now going to be the standard of that fill now, right? So if I press I and sample this, right, and I press K, you see how that's got bigger now? They look like Dorito chips, but we wouldn't want that. So like, let's make it a little bit smaller. I think that's nicer. We press I, K. Yeah, that's nice, fair. Like that. Again, you decide aesthetically, but you don't want the hatch to look so big that it becomes distracting. It should be like a tertiary element at best. And this is actually going to be lighter. I want it to be lighter. So that's one hatch. And then maybe like the wood grain hatch. Let's do that. But let me see, this is what happens. You get like a kind of obsessive about this. Like that. Now wood grain hatch, let me click here and let me go to my swatches. Let's see how that will look. That's nice. So make it maybe a little bit bigger. Maybe some of the furniture pieces are going to be like wood grain. So maybe like this. So that's a little too, you see, that's too big. That's why I wasn't worried about the seam. It doesn't have to be like so perfectly seamless because a lot of these things are so tiny anyway. That's nice. I might come back and make these just a little bit more. Like for example, this, I want the grain to go the other direction. So if I do this way, right, and I sample this, like that, maybe just a little bit bigger so you don't see it. Or I can use the other hatch. So if I do like this. So now the next hatch that I want to do is the surrounding context hatch, okay? So let me just save this file because now you have a lot of geometry here. Let me just save the file. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to turn everything else off except just the trees that I have here. And so I want to make like a little boundary around my residential design and turn all the layers off inside of it. So if I go here, for example, I'll just do something random for now. Let me just see how this looks. Yeah, this is good. Let me see here. So I want this just to be a little bit, I want this on the edge, you know? Like right here. Let's go over here. Same thing. I want this on the edge. Like that. Okay, that's good enough. And I don't want this to have a fill or anything, just a boundary like this. So I'm going to turn everything else off except whatever's in this boundary in the tree. So if I'm going to turn off all of these and turn that off, you see? And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hatch everything around here. So let me get just a rectangle. It could be like a random rectangle. Like this, okay? And so if I select this, right, I can do K for live paint. And so it's gonna continue. Right, great. So now this is like, this has become a live paint, you see? So now I wanna hatch around here. So let me just press V and let me go to my swatches here. So if I go back to my swatches and I do basic patterns, basic graphics, let's do textures. Get a lot of examples here. So I'll do like the stipple irregular. Just gonna add a couple and see how it looks. Okay, so let's start with this. So if I go here, let me see how that looks. That's fine. Let me see. I like this a lot. So we'll do this one for the ground hatch. Yeah, we're gonna do this for the ground hatch. So we can make this bigger, right? So if I go here, that's too big, right? So this, like that. I do I, sample it, and do K, there you go. You see? It's not gonna be like perfect, but just even just a little bit of depth like this is nice. Okay. So now we have everything hatched that we want hatched. I mean, we can also hatch in for example, if I go to my basic decorative, I can go to patterns, basic, I can do basic lines. For example, a rigid installation, right? Yeah, it's like rigid installation right there. We can do that as well if I wanted to. So if I go back to layers and turn it back on. So I'm going to transition over and just show you once I have everything hatched. Okay, so now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to expand this live paint and put it back onto my drawing, okay? So I'm going to do expand live paint. So if I click on this and on this, right, I'm going to do object, live paint, and then expand. And so what that does is that it's going to separate the actual swatches slash hatches from the curvature. And so you can grab the hatch itself. It'll still read as a hatch, but it will be separate now from anything else, okay? So now if I take this, for example, right? If I take this guy, for example, you see, I can pull it away. I can pull this away from the drawing. And the same thing with these hatches here. I just want to do ungroup. I just want to go ungroup. Okay, and so it's going to ungroup it from the curvature. So now it's going to group all of the hatches together. You see? Now everything is grouped together as a hatch. It's very important. You see? All these are now grouped together. Now I want to overlay this on my original because I actually want this to be a little bit lighter. This is too dark because I want my drawing to pop, you know? So what I'll do is first off, I want to take both of these and make sure they're on the same layer. So I'll just do Control X and click on the live paint layer. Make sure paste. So like sometimes I have this on, sometimes I don't. Paste members layers, but I don't want to have it on right now. So I'll do Control F to paste it in place, but on this same layer. So that's number one. Then I want to take this live paint and actually drag it all the way down because I don't want this to be over anything, right? That's the second thing. So let's start with this one, right? Remember I created a boundary here. So let me move this over. Just line it up. I might fast forward through this just because it can get a little annoying. I'll press Control Y because it saves memory. And I can line things up maybe with the tree right here. Control Y is a really great memory saver. So that's the first one, right? Like this. And I can make this just much lighter. I want to make this much lighter right now. So if I go to and change the opacity maybe to like 50, maybe even less than that, maybe like 25. Yeah, that's nice. Maybe 35. I might make the vegetation just a little bit darker, to be honest. Like that. And then the same thing with my floor hatches and all these other hatches up here. Let me do Control Y. Like that. And then I'm going to give this also make it like 50 or maybe 75. And so what's really important is that you can actually change these hatches even within here. Like I can modify these if I wanted to. So like, for example, here, I can ungroup these. I can just ungroup it, right? And select, select these by appearance, for example. If I do select by appearance, right, it'll select all of them that are similar to that. And I can change it. So maybe like instead of this concrete hatch, I want maybe, or I can change the scale of it, for example. So if I go here, let me just sample this for a second. Make it just a little bit bigger. So the one last thing that I want to show you is annotations and texts. So if you notice here, I have this text here. Typically, I like to do all of my annotations like labels and texts in InDesign, but sometimes I'll keep it in Adobe Illustrator as well. So in this scenario, I have all of my room labels in Illustrator. But in general, when I do layout design, I always do it in InDesign. I never really do any type of layout design in Illustrator. I always do it in InDesign. So I'm going to show you some examples towards the end of the video, but I just want to show you my text style. So typically I like to keep my text not too dark and not too big, a little thin. And if I go down to my text setting here, I'm basically just using Arial, regular, but I really increase the tracking. So the tracking is like, it's quite exaggerated, like 250 tracking, which is quite big. But the reason why I do that is I just want the text to feel light. So it's kind of more, the letters are more spread out. This is just a matter of preference. You don't have to do it. And then I typically like to give like elevation markers, like the entrance is like 0 feet. You step up maybe 0.8 feet. These are just placeholder text. But I think adding text here kind of gives just more definition to the space, and it makes it more intentional of how you're organizing the space, obviously. But it's just also a helpful graphic element when you put text on plans. Again, I just want to reiterate, I typically like to do my labels in InDesign, but in this scenario, I'm just doing the text on the floor plan because I really want to keep everything within the floor plan as one unit. I'm going to transition over to InDesign, and I'm going to show you some layout options, and then I'm going to show you some final export options for this floor plan. So here I am in InDesign, and one thing that you notice is that I really like to take advantage of my margins. I actually like to have a lot of nice white space, negative space around my margin, and it just helps balance out the floor plan. So that's one important thing to keep into consideration is your layout and acknowledging negative space. So if I was just going to show the floor plan by itself, so let's say like this was a studio project and you really had like a very nice large floor plan, I would show it by itself on a really big sheet and almost make it feel like a Polaroid or like a portrait within itself. It was like if it's more of a portrait orientation. If it's landscape, the exact same principle would apply. I feel like if you have this very nice detailed architectural floor plan where you put in a lot of effort in the wall assembly, the hatching, the entourage, the depth, I think it's really nice to really present it quite large and on its own. Another really good example is when you match it up with renderings. So for example, here, I think it's really nice when you can see the plan with the rendering. And again, see, this is why I use InDesign because it really helps with the layout of, spacing and margins. And you can use both vector images and raster images. I never ever do my layouts in Illustrator. I always do it in InDesign. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's actually important to understand because you do use it a lot also in the professional world. So I'm going to show you the final export options of these and how these look both as JPEGs and also as PDFs. But one other thing I want to show you is that sometimes I like to overlay my drawings with a color. So for example, here I have this overlaid with like this maybe grayish yellow color. You see this color right here? It's almost like a beige. And I basically just put this color over it. And if you go to effects, I do multiply and it just blends over it. And I'll show you the final exports again. So I'm going to transition over and show you how these look like as final exports. So you see here, this is one of the final exports. This is a JPEG at 300 dpi. And so again, I think the negative space really helps around. Also with the labeling helps with the scale and everything like that. But if we start to zoom in here, you see, again, this is a JPEG, not a PDF, so everything's been flattened and rasterized. I think there's a lot of nice hierarchy here. I think I could have made the blocks just like a little bit darker on here, but I think it reads nicely. I think it feels balanced and there's no competition between the floor plan and the actual drawing and secondary elements. I don't want to make anything else darker. So I think everything else pops like the way I want it to pop. And I think it reads quite well. You could make things a little bit like this a little bit thicker, but then it starts to get a little bit clumsy if you make the cuts a little bit thicker. And you can make the hatches a little bit lighter, but there is this like balance where things start to disappear. So I think this is a really nice balance of blacks and grays when it comes to line weights and the actual or line colors and line weights. So this is the option where you have the plan by itself, right? I'm going to show you with that color overlay on this one. So this is it with the color overlay. I think the color overlay is also really nice. It kind of calms it down a bit, and you can use maybe a lighter color than this, but sometimes I like doing these color overlays. I think that it kind of unifies everything and it makes you focus on the plan itself. And I'm not even zoomed in. I mean, I'm zoomed out. Again, this is 300 dpi. So if I zoom in, you get even more detail. Again, when these plans get really detailed like this, it's really nice to plot them nice and big, all right? So this is an example of a rendering and a plan. I find these very helpful when you have a rendering next to a plan, or like a rendering next to a section, or like a rendering next to a detail, because it ties the entire story of the project together. And I think this is also a really great example of showing your depth of skill sets when it comes to architectural representation or even just drawing and drafting, especially as a student. And so I'm going to just toggle back to the left. Again, another example, you see. So I think, again, you're seeing this and you're also seeing the plan. So I think that this gives you a really great perspective of how you can manage rendering representation and also how you can manage plan representation and drafting and technical drawing. So it's showing you both more of a 3D visual skill set and a actual technical skill set. But also even in like a studio sense, you want to be able to tie these things together. And I think this really helps tie things together. And if it's someone seeing your project for the first time, they're going to really understand your project quite quickly when they can see things like this together at the same time. Again, this is the colored version with this. And then now I want to show you the PDF, how the PDF looks. I did a PDF option of this. The PDF kind of makes the colors a little bit more saturated, so it's a matter of preference whether you want to do PDFs or JPEGs. I just like to do JPEGs because it flattens everything, but you have to do a very high DPA for a JPEG. So this is a PDF example. If you notice, things are just a little bit more red, a little bit more saturated with the color because of how it's reading the color. And I think the line weights are just a little bit nicer because it's keeping it, because PDF reads both vector and raster output. So it's going to read both at the same time quite well. I mean, so does InDesign. But when you save it as a JPEG, JPEG is a pure raster output, whereas a PDF is both raster and vector. So I think this looks, quite clean as well. So it is just a matter of preference whether you want to export things as PDFs or JPEGs. The reason why I have a hesitation with PDFs is because sometimes people do not have the enhanced thin lines unchecked. So if you go to your options and if you go down to preferences, and if you go to page display, some people have enhanced thin lines checked. And what that does is that if you have anything that's a thin line, it'll make it thick and gross. So I typically don't have that. I don't like to have that. And also here, my resolution, like I'm using a pretty low resolution. I can use a much higher resolution because I have a pretty high resolution screen. It's just for graphic purposes and screen recording purposes. But this will even look much better if I increase my system resolution settings. But this is the primary reason why I kind of stay away from PDFs, because some people don't have these unchecked. So it makes your plans look a little clumsy. That's why I like to have things in JPEG because it flattens everything. But again, if you do have it unchecked, it looks great. This is again with the plan view here. This again, it's just really nice to have this type of combination of drawings. So, maybe what's nice, like in the first set, you have a plan with the rendering, maybe a section with the rendering and axon, but I'm just showing you just different variations of renderings. And I made videos about this, by the way. Like, there's videos about how to model this and videos about render settings for this. I showed how to do videos about this entire project. And again, this is the same one, but with, not the color overlay. So that's about it. I really hope you found this helpful. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to do the exact same thing, but with like zoomed in architectural details and understanding how to convey architectural details more so in a studio setting. So if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe because I really want this channel to grow and spread. Thank you.